Hi, and welcome to the Starburst Galaxy Workshop. Today, I'm going to present an exploration of doing basic ETL in Trino. We're going to go through setting up some catalogs and clusters inside of Starburst Galaxy, which is our SaaS platform for Trino. Once we have our catalogs and clusters set up, we're going to show you how we load existing data into Trino. So that'd be like the L part of ETL. And we're going to transform that data into a form that will then show how to access with Tableau. So along the way, we're going to cover things like Iceberg and RBAC and Batch and a bunch of other stuff in Galaxy. Before I get started, I'm Dain Sundstrom. I'm a founder of Trino and Presto. I've been working on it for since the beginning, obviously, so about 10 years now. I really love working on SQL databases, and this is just really great. I'm a CTO here at Starburst, and I'm the lead on Galaxy. So I've been working on Galaxy since we started the project, and I'm really excited to show everyone where we've come with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through kind of a really basic ETL, just to kind of give everyone the idea of how you would do this. Normally we would do this with a tool like Airflow, and I'll just briefly show Airflow. But in general, what we're going to do is we're going to take some data from Twitter and Stack Overflow that we've already loaded into S3. So we have files there. We just need to mount those into our system. But those are not great formats to use these raw data. So we're going to structure them into easier to query tables. And then we're going to combine these together to come up with the final table that we will mount into Tableau. So basically, this is what we're going to do. So we're going to start with this CSV data, convert it to some Iceberg structured data. We'll start with JSON data from Twitter and make a structured version, and then we're going to combine those two data sets into a single table. So in Airflow, this is 3 jobs. So the first one to do the conversion from the unstructured to structured for the 2 different data sets. And then Airflow would then have a job that would, once those finished, load that into the final table, which then you would hook your dashboards up to. I'm not going to show this with Airflow. I'm just kind of demonstrating this how you would do it. It just isn't that interesting to show a demo using a batch tool, because the point of batch tools is like you set them up and they just run. So instead, what I'm going to do is actually show a pretty common workflow where you start with interactive data, you process stuff in interactive, and then you're like, okay, I want to make this run every day. So I'm going to show the interactive side. Later, you would just take these queries and you would paste them into Airflow or whatever tool you're using. But that's generally the idea of what we're going to do. So to start off here, I have created a Starburst Galaxy account for myself. You can go and sign up for this right now if you want. It's just go to galaxy.starburst.io and you can sign up for an account. You'll get $500 in credits to be able to play around with this thing. And it's really simple. So this is just the initial setup. The system will automatically create some catalogs for you and a default sample cluster. I'm not going to use those for this. I'm just going to start from scratch so you can see how this would work entirely. So I am logged in as me. I am an account admin, so I have full rights to do whatever I want here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I have data in S3 and I want to add that existing data for those 2 raw data sources into a cluster. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the catalog section and I'm going to create a new catalog. And in this case, my data is in S3. So this is this S3 connector that we have supports reading data in Hive formats, Iceberg, and the Delta Lake format. So I'm just going to create a catalog called Lake, and this is the main data lake. So the first thing you need to do is talk about like how are you going to authenticate to S3. So in this case, I want to use a cross-account IAM role. I just think it's easier, and I haven't set any up yet, so there's none here. So I'm just going to click this box. So basically, this is pretty straightforward for anyone who's used S3, used Amazon really at all. We give you the account name that we're going to access the data from, and we give you a unique ID for your account so that the role can't be used for different stuff. So I have already gone into S3 and created this account. It takes about 30 seconds. And you just create a new role and you say, grant this to the Starburst account, and then you set this unique external ID. So I'm going to call this the Cinco role, and my ARN is here. All right, now we're going to validate this, and it'll connect in and make sure that we're actually able to talk to your account. So cool. Close, our role is created. So we're going to access data in S3. And then the next question is like, what Metastore do you want to use? So this is a Hive style data lake. So you have to have a Metastore. You can either use Glue, a Hive Metastore, or we'll provide one for you. For this use case, I'm just going to use provide one for me. It's a little bit easier for me to set up here. And I have an S3 bucket, my DB rankings S3 bucket, and I'm going to store my data in the Cinco demo directly. I'm going to support reading external tables. So I'm going to create an external table where the data already exists, which is an external table. So I'm going to turn that on, but I don't need to write to them. We're just going to read them. So let's test our connection, and everything's set up, and it's detected that this bucket's in US East. So created my catalog. Next thing, this gets into the RBAC. So when you're setting up a new catalog, you can say, hey, I want to allow these roles to read anything in this catalog. I want to allow these roles to write anything in these catalogs. For now, I'm just going to leave this alone, but this is really useful when you're setting up new catalogs. Just be like, oh, let's allow the HR role to read all the data here. I am, by default, I'm the account admin, so I will get read and write permissions to all this. And this just is creating insert, update, delete, select permissions, create permissions for those sorts of things. All right. So at this point, you'd want to add this to a cluster. I haven't set up any clusters, so I'm just going to create a new cluster right now. So I'm going to create a cluster for interactive because I am doing this interactively. If I want to do batch, you just click this button here. There's no visible difference. It changes how we run jobs in the background, run jobs inside of Trino. When the batch is enabled, it means that the jobs can, we can run very, very, very large jobs on a much smaller set of hardware without any problems. And if there are any minor failures from something, which is pretty rare in the cloud, the system will recover and move on from those. I'm going to increase the idle shutdown. So we have this feature where if there are no queries run well in 30 minutes, the system will automatically shut down. And I'm going to turn that on in case I get to talking during this demo. And it has automatically added my lake connector. I don't need the rest of the sample connectors. And we're going to give access to everyone. So public is a role that's built into the SQL standard. It means anyone inside of this account will have access to it. It doesn't mean the general public. That's kind of a misnomer, unfortunately, but the SQL spec was written in the 90s and they chose the word public. So this means anyone in my account will be able to run queries on this cluster. All right, so we're going to, and we have added this to our interactive cluster, so we are going to continue. Okay, so at this point, if we go to our clusters page, we'll see that the interactive cluster is there. It's starting up. We can see all of our properties. You can modify these and it'll do that for you. And I am going to switch to our query editor. So in the query editor, I've selected the interactive cluster, and I'll show there's no data in the cluster at this point, so there's no schemas or anything. So there's just the built-in information schema, which comes from the SQL standard. So nothing particularly interesting to show. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a schema to put our tables in. So this is in our Lake catalog. I'm going to select the rankings. I'm going to create the ranking schema. All right, and that's all created. So next thing I'm going to do. So as the account admin, it's pretty standard for an account admin to take the raw data from a you have like ingest pipelines that are pulling raw data out of stuff, and then those will be just set up into the system. They're typically added as read-only to everyone else. The account admin, there's like external systems who manage getting those data sets in there. So in my case, I am going to mount this. So we're going to create a landing table for the Twitter data. So the Twitter data that we've loaded is in JSON format. So we have a format JSON here, and it's stored inside of my bucket in a landing area. So the way the JSON codec works inside of Hive is that your column names are matched to the records in your JSON entry. So there'll be an ID column there. Typically things are just strings, but there is support for like Booleans and ints and a few other things like that. So it is a little bit more powerful. In this case, we just have some basic stuff. I haven't actually mounted all of this. This is a massive record that you get for each tweet. So we have an ID, a URL, our date comes in as a varchar, and then we have a user nested entry inside the JSON where we've kind of pulled out a bunch of information like username and follower count and stuff like that. And then for the tweets, we're keeping the count and the likes as numbers. And most importantly, we have the hashtags that were attached to the tweet. So I'm going to run this, and this runs really quick because we're not actually doing anything. We're just creating the metadata information for it. So now that we have that table, we can come in here, and I'm just going to select out of it, and I'm going to look for the Trino release tweets that we make whenever we do a release. So I run this, and we can see that we have these Trino 378 is released. So this is our standard Trino stuff, and you can see the user record is the Trino DB account and a bunch of information, and you can see our hashtags, etc. So that table's working. So that is how you verify that it was mounted correctly. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the Stack Overflow's data. Stack Overflow has their data's in CSV. They've been around since the 90s, so it's not super surprising. With the connector for CSV and Hive, pretty much everything comes in as varchars, and these are just in order. You have to know the order of the columns. There's no like name matching or anything cool like that. So we're going to run this, and now we now have mounted that. I don't have a simple query for this, so start from. So now you can see there's some data here. It's not a lot of data that is loaded from them, just a bunch of numbers typically. Okay, so as the account admin, I've created all of these two tables, and we can see them. Everything's good. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to simulate as if we're doing this Airflow. So I want to create a separate role so Airflow can run as a specific role inside of our system. as opposed to being like a super admin or something like that. And I'm going to grant the Airflow role the ability to select from our landing table. And I'm going to do the same thing for the Twitter landing table. And finally, I'm going to give the Airflow role the permission to create tables in the lake ranking schema. So now, we have this Airflow role. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch which role I'm running as. I'm going to switch from the account admin. Need to refresh that to the Airflow role. So now if I run you can see I'm the Airflow role, and I also have public because I always have public. So let's make sure that my grants are all working correctly before we get further. And we can still select from the Stack Overflow table. Great. Okay, so we have these two raw tables, which is nice, but like, you know, they're not great to query, and the data they aren't using the right data types or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start with the Twitter data, and what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite the Twitter data so it's got this much simpler format. We're going to pull out the column. We're going to pull out the create date column. We're going to have the username and the content of the tweet, the hashtags, etc. And most importantly, what we're doing here is we're using our naming convention from our company. So it's very common for SQL to use underscores as opposed to camel case, which Jason uses. So we're going to use underscores. We're going to have proper data types. And for this table, we're going to write it in the iceberg format. So we just say type iceberg. And let's run this. Okay. So normally what you would do in something like Airflow is you would create your tables, and then every day you would come in and run a query that loads new data into it, either dropping the old stuff and adding new stuff, adding your new load, or you would add an incremental load depending on what you're doing. I'm just doing a simple one-time load here. So what we're going to do is we're going to read from our landing table. We're going to parse the date using the ISO, because it's an ISO date if you actually look at it. We're going to pull out the user.username because that was a nested row. We're going to take the hashtags and we're going to transform them so they're in lowercase. They're like in weird mixed cases because it's just like the raw hashtags that users type into Twitter. And so the casing comes out wrong. And we're going to pull out all the counts. So let's run this. And very quickly, we loaded 11,000 rows. All right. And let's just take a quick peek at that. Actually, we can use the little structured, and we will just have it select out 10 rows for us. So we can see we have our queries, you know, something about Apache and some job alerts, and we have our hashtags, and everything's good. All right. So now I'm going to quickly do the same thing for the CSV data from Stack Overflow. Same thing. Again, naming conventions, tag name, etc. I need to not select my one little section. Okay, and then we're going to run our insert, slightly different date format, because always there's different date formats when you're dealing with raw data. Got to cast into our ints, and that's pretty straightforward. Okay, so we loaded 65,000 rows there. All right. So we have our two, go back to this. So we've created these two, we've created these two. Now we're going to create this final table and we're going to load our data set into it. There we go. So I am going to create our final table. So we're going to figure out which system the tweets are about, and we're going to calculate a score of the interest in them. So this is kind of like a standard kind of marketing thing that the marketing department would be like, oh, how are we ranking up against some of the other people in this space? And like, let's go count the number of tweets, and we're going to count the number of Stack Overflow entries and things like that to figure out how much interest there is in our project. So very simple kind of final result here. So what we're doing is we're going to insert into our consumer rankings, and we're going to select from the Twitter structured data. We're going to go through and we're going to do a case statement. We're going to process the tags, and we're going to look for a tag that has Trino in it. And so if any of the tags match Trino, then it'll be Trino. If any of the tags match Redshift, it'll be Redshift, and so on. Once we've done that, we will do obviously a group by count on that. And then we're going to join that with the Stack Overflow data, which just has like a single tag associated with the entries. And we're going to do a group by count on that. And finally, we join those two together using the tag name. All right, so, oops, wrong button. All right, so we got our 5 rows, and we can do let's order to descending. All right. And you can see the interest in Mongo, Redshift, Trino, Impala, Druid. Those are just the data sets we pulled out for this demo. And that is, so this is what the person doing, the ETL or the data work, this is where depending on the company, you might end up where it's like, okay, I created the table. We have the structured table. So like, when marketing comes back in a week and says, oh, what I'd like to do is only include people that have friend counts bigger than this, or let's find those people who have big friend counts so we can target them for marketing campaigns, etc. So like you could do more and more as you dig into it. So that's really the point of making your structured tables. So we have this, and we really like this table. So what we're going to do is, we're going to make this available to anyone inside of our company to be able to select on this table so they can make their own dashboards, etc. So if I switch now to like the public role, we can see that in this, the only tables I'm going to be allowed to see is the consumer rankings table. So now I'm going to show you how you actually take this table and you turn it into a dashboard. So I'm going to go to the cluster section of Galaxy. And if we come to this interactive cluster and I do get connection info, it tells you all the information you need to connect to. So the host name and the port, etc. So now I'm going to switch to Tableau. So inside of Tableau, I have this Starburst Galaxy because I loaded the Starburst extension in. So we have this host name. This is all pre-filled because I already set this up earlier. We're going to use username and password, and put my password in. And you'll have to set SSL, obviously make sure the port is 443. and then we'll connect in. Okay, so we're going to use our lake connector and the DB rankings. Okay, so not the greatest with Tableau, so you'll have to forgive me. The people who use Tableau all the time are like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. All right, so we are going to make a simple bar chart, and we want a graph. Show me graph. Look at that. I know where all the buttons are. Okay, so, and we can see the same thing as a simple graph. So it shows you how easy it is to like connect through to Tableau. Doesn't take very much. So just before I wrap up, I'm gonna walk through some of the other things that I personally really like inside of Galaxy. So this whole time I've been running queries. We have the full query history of what we've been doing. So if I find one of the query text, let's find one of the insert queries. So we have the insert query. We can see the query. This is my personal favorite section, which is like all the low-level details of what happened inside the query. I use this to debug stuff. And we can see which catalogs, which tables were involved. So this thing read from 2 tables and wrote to another one. You see all the stats about it. So I love the query history. It's super fun. Gets better every week as we roll out new features. I showed you the catalogs. So the access control system, this is something we're just rolling out now. I've been using it throughout, the thing that allows us to have RBAC on tables. So if you'll see, like, we have all these permissions that have been created on the lake rankings table, and we've select permissions and insert and et cetera on all of our tables. And we can see Airflow has been given just a subset of those. And obviously our public only has the single select on the table. And it's a nice cloud section to manage our IAM roles, which I showed earlier. And the other thing I love, because I always want to know, like, oh, who went and like, you know, deleted my catalog or, you know, stopped the cluster or whatever. So you can see like all the audit log of all the actions I've been taking. Like, you know, I started some clusters, I created a catalog. Well, this is earlier when I was cleaning up roles. So you could see all the sort of different pits I did as we went through this whole thing. So that is a very basic overview of how you can do ETL inside of Trino. Using the Galaxy SaaS. As you see, it's pretty easy to set up and get going. And we've covered the mounting tables, creating catalogs, etc. We have the nice new RBAC stuff. So RBAC, the single connector that has Iceberg and Delta and Hive all together, and the new batch features will all be rolling out. They're all rolling out over the next couple of weeks. And if you want to try them out now, just sign up for an account and send a message to support, and we can enable those in your account early. But they should all be enabled in the next few weeks. Thank you everyone for attending. This is really great, and I appreciate your time.